Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second entry in our series, Accounts from the Abyss. I am the curator, and I hope you enjoy. The Winter Rites. My journey toward the northern border took several days, each one colder than the last. Settlements diminished quickly as I traveled, giving way to long stretches of blank snowfields and dark stands of timber. The last village I passed was modest and quiet, its homes built low against the weather, smoke rising from only a few chimneys. Most people lived farther south, where winters were still harsh but not as unforgiving. Few chose to settle this far north, where winter was at its worst. Beyond that point, the road slipped into stretches of long country. Frost clung to weeds that pushed through snow, turning them brittle under my boots. The wind carried a dry cold that seeped through the thicker layers of my coat, enough to sting my hands whenever I removed my gloves to make a note in my journal. Most nights I camped beneath outcrops of rock, or the shelter of bowed pines, melting snow for water and rationing whatever bread I had left. By the fourth morning, the border came into view. A line of pale fencing and a gate nearly swallowed under white drifts. It was the first man-made structure I'd seen since leaving the last village behind. A single wooden gate, half buried, distinctly marking the crossing between my homeland and the country beyond it. Two places that had never entirely trusted one another, especially in recent years. Snow drifted across the packed road in long, slow breaths, obscuring the faint tracks of those who had passed before me. I kept my hood low and my satchel close, more out of habit than fear. When the guards stepped from their post, their expressions were flat and tired. Neither looked particularly interested in dealing with another traveler. I could tell my arrival did little to break the monotony of their day. Name? One asked without much conviction. I stated my name. It felt strange. After leaving the order, I had grown used to being unnoticed. He studied me warily. The fatigue in his face was obvious. Winter did not treat these men kindly. And your purpose heading north? He continued. I gave the most harmless lie I could think of. To visit an old family friend, whom I have not seen in many years, I said. The guard's reaction was a little more than a wary lift of his brow. My clothing gave me away easily enough. The lighter travel layers and journal strapped to my satchel told him everything he needed to know. You scholars always pick the worst time to travel, he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Just stay alert. People aren't the only ones wandering these roads. The other guard huffed a short laugh. North in the dead of winter? Most don't make it far before turning back. Perhaps, I said, managing a polite smile. But I am here. They exchanged a look, half sympathy, half disbelief, before stepping aside. Suit yourself, the first guard said. Get through the mountains before the next storm rolls in. Nothing good out there for travelers this time of year. He stamped my passage and motioned toward the gate with a curt flick of his hand before retreating to shelter. The air became more frigid once I crossed the gate, harsher than anything on the southern roads that had brought me here. The road narrowed to a ribbon of ice between low snow drowned hills. The forest rose dark and silent on either side, branches heavy with frost. My breath steamed in the air, drifting upward in ribbons that disappeared into the pale, distant glow of the northern sky. Behind me, both guards had already disappeared from view. Ahead of me lay miles of frozen wilderness and the northern village whose winter festival drew so many curious travelers and so many unsettling rumors. My trek after the border passed in slow, uneven stretches. The road climbed steadily upward, packed snow thinning into patches of exposed ice where the wind had scraped it bare. My steps fell into a familiar rhythm, careful, controlled, always searching for the next stable foothold. My senses dulled with the passing of time. The constant chill biting at my body began to feel strangely familiar, nearly comforting. As my climb grew steeper, the trees gave way to patches of open hillside, where wind had room to gather strength. Roads began to narrow as the land grew harsher, winding through stretches of frozen heath and sparse woodland where settlements were few and far between. I passed through small towns built to endure the cold, with clusters of timber buildings gathered around wells or shared fires. Most offered little more than a place to rest and trade supplies. Their people accustomed to travelers passing through, but rarely staying. In these places, I spoke with merchants, hunters, and laborers whose lives were shaped by winter. They noticed my accent quickly and asked where I was headed, often giving me a raised brow when I mentioned the coast. Some mentioned the auroras in passing. Others spoke of the weather turning unpredictable the further north one went. Their words never aligned fully. What one dismissed as superstition, another treated with quiet seriousness. No one lingered on the subject for long, and I learned to accept half answers as a norm. By the seventh day, I crossed paths with a small caravan heading south. Four merchants, wrapped to the eyes in heavy furs, leading a pair of laden mules. Their breath fogged in the air like pale smoke. One of them slowed as we drew even. Haven't seen stitching like that since I traded down south, he said, easing his mule aside. He studied me a moment longer, then added, "You're going in the wrong direction." Seems to be the consensus, I replied. He gave a short chuckle. Festival season draws plenty of fresh faces north. But not from your side of the border. I hope you're prepared. I nodded, but he didn't elaborate. None of them did. They pressed on, boots crunching rhythmically as they disappeared down the slope. Later, I met two hunters returning from the ridgeline. One carried a bundle of pelts. The other had nothing but an empty sling. They paused when they drew near. The hunter with pelts gave me a blunt, straightforward once over, as if checking whether I was trouble or simply passing through. His companion's expression was less guarded, but he remained behind the first, keeping to his own space. Are you heading to the village? The first asked. I am, I said. Both paused. The man carrying pelts adjusted his grip, while the other brushed ice from his beard. The empty handed hunter let out a low groan and set his pack down, rolling his shoulder as a signal for them to take a break. His companion followed suit, taking the opportunity to draw a flask from under his fur lined coat. The first hunter's eyes met mine as his glance shifted upward. You should keep an eye on the sky. Those auroras were brighter than fire last night. The whole ridge lit up green and blue. The second hunter muttered, Every winter you say that means something. Because sometimes it does, the first shot back. Ask anyone who lives up that way. The second gave me a tired look. He's superstitious. Pay him no mind. They weren't normal lights, the first insisted. I didn't comment. They seemed content to disagree with each other. Well, if you're headed that way, you'll see what I mean soon enough, the pelts carrier said. Just keep your wits about you. His companion added, And don't trust the paths past sundown. Snow hides holes deep enough to swallow a horse. The first hunter agreed. Storm coming tonight, too. If you push through, aim to reach the village before dark. They gave me brief, tired looks before going their way, still half arguing, half laughing, about whose hunting luck had been worse. As afternoon settled in, I overtook a lone traveler, a woman guiding a sled piled with goods. She greeted me with a nod, but kept her pace steady. I asked if the village was much farther. Half a day, she said. You'll hear the bells before you see gates. Bells? For the festival, she said. It's a very big deal up there. Whole village gets into it. Decorations, food stalls, music, all of it. She lowered her voice a little. People say the village changes this time of year. Not just the crowds or the noise. Mood shifts. Folks act different. She shrugged lightly, her tone neither firm nor doubtful. Superstitions, probably. But the villagers I passed lately, they all seem a bit on edge. Her voice trailed off, as if the thought alone unsettled her. She cast one more glance down the empty trail behind us. You're close enough now that it'd be foolish to turn back. It'll be safer to get lodging there than camp out here in this season. She adjusted her grip on the rope and set off again. Faster this time. I couldn't help but feel that she was eager to put distance between herself and that village. I watched her vanish around a bend, the faint scraping of her runners fading into the wind. By the time sunlight dipped behind the ridge, the scattered stories had become a blur of contradictions. Shifting lights in the sky, weather turning strange, and vague cautions that no one really explained. Whether it was out of respect, fear, or celebration, whatever truth lay behind it all left me more compelled than before to understand what lay beneath the surface. As daylight faded, I noticed as the path narrowed, winding between two ridgelines, with snow rising in soft drifts on either side. The light had begun to flatten into a muted gray that precedes evening, and the only sound was the steady crunch of my boots. I stopped to catch my breath, dropping my bag to let my shoulders rest. A quick glance back showed me a long trail of my own footprints, trailing back down the path. I kept quiet and attempted to listen for the sound of bells ringing, as the woman I met earlier had advised. That was when I noticed it. A small figure stood atop a nearby snowdrift, faint, pale, and no larger than a child's doll. Its wings shimmered softly, catching a weak glint of daylight. It held a faint brightness of its own, just enough to stand out against the snow. It tilted its head, watching me with a quiet stillness that I couldn't make sense of. I blinked. The figure vanished. No sound, no flutter of wings, simply gone, as though the air had folded around it. I remained where I was, scanning the drift, the trees, the empty trail behind me. Nothing moved. I rubbed my eyes, partially convinced that the light was playing tricks on me. A part of me wondered if the long hours spent on this trail had gotten to me, but there weren't any traces left behind to prove what I saw. I made a mental note to ask someone in the village about it when the opportunity came. Shadows were starting to creep across the path as I came to realize that I had lingered for just a moment too long. In the distance, a subtle breeze moved through the trees, carrying the soft chiming of bells. The sound drifted with gusts of cold air, each one growing a little stronger. Beyond the horizon, I caught glimpses of a settlement taking shape. Roofs emerged first, clustered against the slope, beyond a stand of firs. Smoke lifted in steady lines from chimneys, dispersing as it met the pale sky. As I drew closer, melodies reached me in fragments. A distant flute, the uneven beat of a drum, the soft chiming of bells, each on its own rhythm. The gate was open, trimmed with evergreen branches and strips of blue and white cloth that stirred in the breeze. Two guards stood at their post beside a small brazier whose coals glowed faintly, casting a soft red light on the snow around their boots. At the sight of my approach, one of them straightened and gave me a rigid wave. "Greetings," he said, his northern accent noticeable, but not unfriendly. "I take it you're here to indulge a bit and enjoy the celebrations?" "I hope so, though I'm wondering, how can you be sure that's my only intention?" The guard huffed a short laugh. "Trust me, the ones who mean trouble don't bother asking first. You're fine." He pointed to a shack next to him where his companion had stepped inside of. "Just make sure to give him your name and reason for visiting. We don't want to lose track." "Plenty of visitors this month," he said. "Stick to the main streets and you'll be fine. Market Square straight ahead. Follow the lanterns." Inside the gate, the village opened in a broad arc around a central square. Lanterns hung from posts and door frames, some simple glass globes, others handmade from colored hide, stretched over wooden frames, casting warm gold across the snow. Roasted meat and wood smoke drifted through the square, mixed with a sweet, spiced scent I couldn't immediately name. Bells chimed from deeper within the streets, their short, bright tones weaving through the steady hum of voices. Musicians clustered near the square, testing notes and adjusting strings, their melody slipping between a march and a dance as they argued quietly over tempo. Children sprinted through the open space, boots kicking up fine powder as they chased one another around barrels and sleds. Watching them, I felt a brief ache of familiarity, the simple, unbothered joy of youth. It had been a long time since anything in my life had felt that unburdened. Fishermen with weathered faces and thick gloves heaved baskets of river catch toward a row of stalls, the sharp scent of brine and cold water trailing behind them as they called instructions to one another over the din. A cooper rolled an empty barrel across the square, guiding it with small practiced taps that fell into an easy rhythm with the music drifting through the air. Nearby, a woodworker, sleeves covered with pale sawdust, and a small knife still tucked into her belt, handed a neatly wrapped bundle to a waiting customer. His bright laugh burst out bright and unrestrained, enough to draw a few curious glances. His children tugged excitedly at his coat, bouncing on their toes as they whispered guesses about what he'd brought home. The bustle, the noise, the liveliness of human activity, together, it carried a blistering warmth, the kind that felt capable of warding off even the most frigid of temperatures. Everyone was joining hands and working with incredible coordination, each step and shout blending naturally into their preparations. Sled runners rasped over condensed snow. Crates settled into the ground with weighty thumps, and the bright chatter of neighbors meeting in passing layered easily over the music. Men and women worked side by side without hesitation, handing tools and lifting boards in steady chains of movement. Their tasks left them with little curiosity, as no one paused long enough to wonder who I was. The work seemed to pull them along in one continuous current. Near the center of the square, a tall bonfire stood, waiting to be lit. The logs were arranged in a deliberate cone, some of the outer pieces slightly charred from prior use. Villagers were gathered around it in natural groups, families huddled close, tradesmen with aprons and gloves still on, children climbing onto crates to see above the crowd. An older man stood at the forefront, dressed in deep toned robes, threaded with intricate patterns of umber, dark violet, and soft gold. The embroidery caught the lantern lights in brief flashes, designs revealing themselves only when he moved. The fabric was thick from decades of wear, yet clearly tended with care. His hair, long and silver with faint ash tones, picked up brief shades of dusk violet when the moonlight touched it. Slim bands of polished metal secured it neatly behind him. His posture carried a quiet, commanding authority, drawing every nearby gaze without a word, and those closest to him instinctively kept their distance, as though an invisible boundary held them back. Along the square's edge, tables held the evening's offerings, bread cut into thick pieces, roasted fish with crisped edges, and bowls of broth releasing slow, steady curls of steam. The smells drifting from the table blended in perfect harmony. The warmth of bread with its faintly sweet crust, the mild smoky salt of fish, and the gentle earthen fragrance of herbs simmered into stock. Ceramic dishes and wooden utensils were lined up neatly besides serving pots. He lifted a hand, and within moments, the square fell into a silent hush. Thank you, he began, his voice steady and warm. All of you. It is your hard work that carried us through another year. Every harvest, every trade, every long night spent keeping this place running. None of it goes unnoticed. A few heads bowed, others straightened, carrying themselves with great poise. We have had our share of setbacks, he went on. The early rains threatened the fields, and losing some of our senior craftsmen made more than a few tasks harder than they should have been. But you adapted, you stepped in for one another, and because of that, we've come out stronger. A couple of scattered voices echoed from the crowd, while the rest of the villagers murmured softly in agreement. He motioned to the decorations draped across the square and the torches lined neatly beside the evening's dishes. I could only assume that once they were lit, a feast would be underway. I believe the weeks ahead would be just as promising. You've earned these days. Let us rejoice and reap the fruits of our labor. From the outskirts, I watched as villagers broke into song and dance. Their voices carried across the square as families and neighbors gathered around the bonfire, exchanging plates of food. It was nothing like the way the travelers on the road had described them. The scene before me felt genuinely heartening. But this moment clearly belonged to them, not me. I needed to find a place to rest. My body was beginning to feel heavy, and the fatigue of travel was catching up to me faster than I expected.